Signs of Christ's return. The disciples walked alongside Jesus as he left the temple, its towering buildings gleaming in the sunlight. The architecture was magnificent, each stone carefully placed, a testament to the glory of the temple. One of the disciples gestured toward the grand structures, admiration evident in his voice. But Jesus' response was not what they expected. "Do you not see all these things?" he said, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." The disciples fell silent, his words weighing heavily on them. The temple, the center of their worship and identity, reduced to rubble. It was almost unthinkable. They followed him as he led them up to the Mount of Olives, the city sprawling beneath them, and waited until he sat down. Then, unable to contain their curiosity and concern, they approached him privately. "Tell us," they asked earnestly, "when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus looked at them, his gaze calm but resolute, as he began to answer. "See to it that no one misleads you," he said, his words carrying the weight of a warning. "For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will mislead many." The disciples exchanged uneasy glances, picturing impostors claiming to be the Messiah, deceiving those desperate for hope. But Jesus continued, painting a vivid picture of what was to come. "You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars," he said. "See that you are not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end." His tone was firm, urging them to hold steady in the face of turmoil. "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes." The disciples listened intently, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of the trials ahead. Yet Jesus reassured them, adding, "But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs." The metaphor struck a chord. Birth pangs signified not only pain, but also the promise of something new, something transformative. The path would be arduous, but it was leading somewhere. "Then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you," Jesus continued, his voice unwavering. "And you will be hated by all nations because of my name." The disciples' expressions grew somber, understanding the cost of their calling. "At that time," he said, "many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many." He paused, the gravity of his next words sinking in. "Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved." Though the trials he described were daunting, his words carried a thread of hope. Endurance would lead to salvation. And then, lifting their gaze to the broader horizon, he gave them a vision of the ultimate purpose. "This gospel of the kingdom," he said, "shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." The disciples sat in reflective silence, the weight of Jesus' words resting on their hearts. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was not without purpose. As they gazed out over Jerusalem, they felt both the challenge and the hope of the journey they were called to, knowing they were part of something far greater than themselves. And in Jesus' unwavering presence, they found the strength to face what was to come. Perilous times. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the hills of Judea. The air carried an eerie stillness, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Jesus stood with his disciples, his expression a mixture of solemnity and urgency. His voice broke the silence, steady and commanding, as he spoke of events yet to come. "When you see the abomination of desolation," he began, his tone measured but intense, "spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains." The disciples exchanged glances, their hearts quickening at the weight of his words. This was no ordinary warning. It was a call to action, a dire instruction for the days of great peril ahead. "Whoever is on the housetop," Jesus continued, "must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. And whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak." He painted a vivid picture of urgency, of a time when hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. The disciples felt a growing unease as they imagined the chaos he described. "But woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days," Jesus said, his voice softening with compassion. "Pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath." The thought of vulnerable mothers and infants fleeing in the bitter cold or under the restrictions of the Sabbath sent a chill through his listeners. His words carried a clear message: prepare your hearts, for the trials ahead will test the strength of all. "For then," Jesus said, his gaze fixed on the horizon, "there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short." The disciples' faces grew somber as they absorbed his prophecy, the magnitude of what he described leaving them silent. Yet even in the midst of this forewarning, there was a thread of hope. God's mercy would intervene for the sake of his chosen. "Then if anyone says to you, 'Behold, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe him," Jesus cautioned, his voice firm. "For false Christs and false prophets will arise, and will show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance." His warning was clear. The coming days would bring deception, and even the faithful would need to remain vigilant. The disciples nodded, their resolve hardening as they grasped the importance of staying steadfast in truth. "So if they say to you, 'Behold, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. Or, 'Behold, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe them," Jesus continued. "For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be." The imagery was powerful, evoking the brilliance and universality of his return. There would be no mistaking it when the time came. His coming would be undeniable, like a flash of lightning illuminating the entire sky. "Wherever the corpse is," Jesus concluded, "there the vultures will gather." His final words hung in the air, cryptic yet vivid, a reminder of the inevitability of judgment and the signs that would accompany it. The disciples sat in quiet reflection, their hearts heavy yet resolute. They could feel the weight of his warning, but they also saw the promise of his faithfulness woven through the trials to come. The group remained on the hillside for a time, the setting sun bathing the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. As they descended back into the valley, his words lingered in their hearts, a guide for the perilous days that lay ahead, a call to endurance, faith, and unwavering hope in the Son of Man. The glorious return. The world seemed to hold its breath as the events Jesus spoke of unfolded. The skies above, once adorned with the warmth of the sun and the soft glow of the moon, grew heavy with an otherworldly darkness. The sun, as if extinguished, failed to cast its light, and the moon offered no comfort to the shadowed land. Above, the stars began to fall, streaking through the heavens like tears, while the very foundations of the sky seemed to tremble. The powers of the cosmos, so steadfast and eternal, were shaken to their core. Amidst this cosmic upheaval, hearts around the world filled with awe and dread. Then, piercing through the chaos, came a sign unlike any other. In the expanse of the darkened sky, the sign of the Son of Man appeared, radiant, glorious, unmistakable. Its brilliance illuminated the earth, drawing the gaze of all tribes and nations. And as they beheld it, a wave of mourning swept over humanity. Faces turned upward, and tears fell freely as the realization dawned. The Son of Man had come. And there he was, majestic and magnificent, riding on the clouds of the sky. Power radiated from his presence, and his glory was beyond words, captivating yet humbling all who looked upon him. His arrival was like lightning flashing from one end of the heavens to the other, a display so vast and undeniable that none could ignore it. Then, a sound unlike any other echoed through the world, a great trumpet blast that resonated across mountains and valleys, through forests and cities. The sound carried with it a sense of purpose, calling forth the angels of heaven. From the four corners of the earth, the angels spread out, swift and resolute, their wings spanning the skies as they moved with divine authority. The mission was clear. From one end of the heavens to the other, the angels began to gather the elect, the faithful, those who had endured the trials, those who had clung to hope amidst tribulation. Across every land and sea, they found them, bringing them together with a love and care that mirrored the heart of the one who had sent them. The scene was breathtaking, both solemn and triumphant. The powers of heaven had been shaken, the earth transformed, and the coming of the Son of Man fulfilled in a moment of indescribable splendor. As the tribes of the earth looked on, some trembling with sorrow, others overwhelmed with joy, the promise of redemption unfolded before their very eyes. It was a moment of both reckoning and restoration, of justice and mercy intertwined. And through it all, the power and glory of the Son of Man shone as a beacon, uniting heaven and earth in a way that would never be forgotten. Those who had awaited his coming with faith now found themselves gathered under his eternal reign, their hope realized in the brilliance of his presence. Parable of the Fig Tree. Jesus sat with his disciples on the Mount of Olives, the golden light of the evening sun bathing the hills around them. The city of Jerusalem stretched out below, but their attention was entirely fixed on him as he spoke words that would shape their hearts and strengthen their faith. "Now learn the parable from the fig tree," he began, his voice gentle yet filled with purpose. The disciples leaned in, their curiosity piqued. "When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near." His words painted a vivid image, one that each of them could picture, a tree awakening after the long slumber of winter, its tender leaves a quiet announcement of the changing season. "So you too," Jesus continued, "when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door." The disciples exchanged glances, a sense of anticipation building among them. His teaching was clear. The signs he had spoken of were not random events. They were markers of his return, signs to prepare their hearts. "Truly I say to you," Jesus added, his tone resolute, "this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." There was a reverence in his voice, a reminder that while the world around them might crumble and change, his promises would endure forever. The disciples felt a deep sense of awe, realizing the eternal weight of the truths he was revealing. "But of that day and hour," Jesus said, his voice softening, "no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone." The mystery of this statement hung in the air, humbling them. It was a reminder that some things were known only to God, calling them to trust in his timing. "For the coming of the Son of Man," Jesus continued, "will be just like the days of Noah." He paused, allowing the weight of those words to settle. "For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away, so will the coming of the Son of Man be." The imagery was stark, a world caught unawares, consumed with its routines, oblivious to the looming reality. The disciples could almost hear the echoes of Noah's warning cries, unheeded until the moment it was too late. "Then," Jesus said, his voice steady but urgent, "there will be 2 men in the field. One will be taken and one will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and one will be left." The stark reality of his words gripped them. Ordinary lives, everyday tasks, interrupted by an extraordinary moment. The separation would be sudden and final, a call to readiness for all who heard him. As Jesus' voice faded into the quiet of the evening, the disciples sat in contemplative silence, their hearts stirred by the depth of what he had shared. His words carried both warning and hope, calling them, and all who would hear, to live with faith, vigilance, and a steadfast trust in the promise of his return. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows over the Mount of Olives. Yet in the hearts of those who sat with him, there was a light, an understanding that while the future held uncertainty, his word was unshakable. They would not forget his teachings, and they would carry them forward, prepared for the day when the Son of Man would come in glory. Be ready for his coming. The air was quiet and still as Jesus looked at his disciples, his expression thoughtful yet firm. His words, spoken with urgency, were meant to prepare their hearts for the unknown. They leaned in, sensing the gravity of what he was about to share. "Be on the alert," Jesus began, his voice steady and clear. "For you do not know which day your Lord is coming." The disciples exchanged glances, realizing the weight of his warning. He continued, illustrating his point with a vivid picture. "If the head of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will." The imagery of a thief arriving in the night struck them, a moment of vulnerability, unexpected and unprepared. Jesus was urging them to always be watchful, to live as though his return was imminent. He paused, then shifted to another parable, one that painted a picture of responsibility and the consequences of faithfulness, or the lack of it. "Who then is the faithful and sensible slave?" Jesus asked, "whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time." The disciples could easily imagine such a scene, a trusted servant tasked with caring for the household in the master's absence. "Blessed is that slave," Jesus continued, "whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions." There was a sense of joy in his words, a promise of reward for those who remained steadfast and responsible. The faithful servant honored the trust placed in him, living with the knowledge that the master could return at any moment. But then, Jesus' tone grew more somber as he spoke of another servant, one whose heart was not faithful. "But if that evil slave says in his heart, 'My master is not coming for a long time,' and begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards." The disciples could picture the scene, a servant who, thinking he could act without consequence, descended into selfishness and cruelty, abusing his position of trust. "The master of that slave," Jesus said, his voice heavy with warning, "will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour which he does not know. He will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The parable was stark, leaving no room for ambiguity. The disciples felt the weight of it, understanding the call to live with integrity and vigilance. Faithfulness was not a matter of convenience, but a way of life, carried out even when the master seemed far off. Jesus' gaze swept over the group, his words lingering in the air. The disciples sat in reflective silence, their hearts stirred by the depth of his teaching. They understood that this was more than a warning. It was a call to readiness, a challenge to live every moment in expectation of his return. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, they resolved to heed his words, their hearts aligning with the call to be faithful servants, prepared and unwavering, no matter when the master would return.